Begin today with a voice that most Americans have never heard or named.
Hello, you wonderful people. Today is Saturday, May 2nd, 2026. Please watch this. I'll play a little bit of it, but go online and watch this.
That most of you wouldn't know about, but probably should. In January of 1901, a man named George Henry White rose to address the United States Congress for the last time. He was a lawyer and a Republican from North Carolina. He was the son of a formerly enslaved man, and he had served 2 terms in the House of Representatives. He was also, at that moment, the only black member of Congress, and he knew he was about to become the last one for a long time. Not because he had lost an election fairly, but because the full machinery of disenfranchisement, poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, violence, and the complicity of federal courts had made it impossible for black Americans to elect representatives who looked like them. An era was ending, and George Henry White knew it. Recounting all the progress black Americans had made since the end of the Civil War 36 years earlier, before white Confederates successfully clawed back the political gains made by black Americans, Congressman White declared in part, quote, "We have done it in the face of lynching, burning at the stake, with the humiliation of Jim Crow laws, the disenfranchisement of our male citizens, slander, and the degradation of our women, with the factories closed against us. With all these odds against us, we are forging our way ahead, slowly, perhaps, but surely. This, Mr. Chairman, is perhaps the Negro's temporary farewell to the American Congress, but, Phoenix-like, he will rise up someday and come again." He was right. Black Americans would rise again, but not before decades of terror, disenfranchisement, and the systematic erasure of black political power, enabled, just as before, by the courts, by the states, and by those who understood that democracy actualized threatened their monopoly on power. This week I'm thinking about George Henry White because what happened at the Supreme Court on Wednesday feels a lot like that moment, that shameful chapter again. Consider this. When did American democracy actually begin? Not the promise of it, not the words on paper, but the real actual thing, the version where all citizens, regardless of race or gender, could vote, hold office, and have their voices count. The answer is not 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, nor is it 1787 with the Constitution. It is Reconstruction, or at least partially it was Reconstruction. What we think of as the founding was not in fact a democracy. The Declaration of Independence proclaimed that all men are created equal, but in practice it did not guarantee equal rights for all people. The Constitution that followed in 1787 was built on compromises that protected slavery. Women could not vote. Black people were not citizens. What changed things were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the Reconstruction Amendments that were adopted during and after the Civil War. The 13th abolished slavery. The 14th made black American citizens for the first time, guaranteeing them equal protection under the law. The 15th gave black men the right to vote. Together, they did what the founders had refused to do. They made the promise of the Declaration of Independence apply to everyone. These 3 amendments fulfilled the promise of the Declaration of Independence some 90 years after its signing. The America that emerged from Reconstruction was a fundamentally different country than the one that the founders built. And for a brief, extraordinary moment, it really worked. After the Civil War and the passage of the Reconstruction Amendments, black men voted across the South in massive numbers. They ran for office, and they won. Between 1870 and 1901, 22 black men were elected to Congress. In states like Mississippi and South Carolina, where black people were the majority, they participated in government. And then it all ended because the courts took it away. Despite the Reconstruction Amendments, the southern states overturned the period's small d democratic progress, implementing Jim Crow segregation and denying black people the right to vote. White Southerners called it the redemption. Constitutional law professor Kermit Roosevelt describes it for what it was, an attempt to restore the political regime of white supremacy. He writes, quote, "The former Confederate states resisted black citizenship and they resisted black equality. And that's what the Reconstruction Amendments are meant to overcome. Black people will be full and equal citizens of the new American nation. And the national government and the U.S. Army will protect their rights." But of course, the former Confederates didn't accept that, and their resistance outlasted the national will to fight for equality. The Supreme Court of the late 19th century gutted Reconstruction the same way today's Supreme Court is gutting the Voting Rights Act, piece by piece, ruling by ruling, always with careful legal language designed to mask what's actually happening. By 1901, when George Henry White rose to give that farewell address, the damage was complete. The full machinery of disenfranchisement had been assembled with the blessing of the federal courts, and black representation in Congress would not recover for generations. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was born of what Justice Elena Kagan, writing in her dissent this week, called the literal blood of Union soldiers and civil rights marchers. Before the Voting Rights Act, half of Selma, Alabama was black. 2% of black eligible voters in the country were registered. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and organized terror had done the intended work of suppressing the black vote. The Voting Rights Act, signed by President Lyndon Johnson, changed that. It banned discriminatory qualification laws. It required the worst offending states to get federal approval before changing voting rules. It gave voters the power to challenge electoral maps designed to dilute their power. The results were extraordinary. In 1964, the year before the Voting Rights Act, there were 4 black members of Congress. Today, or rather until this week, there were 67. More than 10,000 black elected officials serve across the country today, compared to 1,469 in 1970. We've really only been living in something resembling a true multiracial democracy for 60 years. 60 years in a country that is 250 years old. This week, the Supreme Court completed what journalist and scholar Nikole Hannah-Jones called the second nadir. The first nadir, a term coined by the historian Rayford Logan, described the period following Reconstruction, roughly 1877 through the early 20th century. What white Confederates celebrated as the redemption was for black Americans the lowest point since slavery. The federal government had abandoned them to violence and disenfranchisement. Everything built during Reconstruction was systematically torn down. Hannah-Jones argues that we're living through a second one, and after Wednesday's ruling, it's kind of hard to disagree. In a 6-3 ruling in Louisiana versus Calais, the court's conservative supermajority gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the provision that allowed voters to challenge electoral maps designed to dilute the power of black communities. Writing for the majority, Justice Samuel Alito, the same justice who wrote the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, held that the Voting Rights Act now requires proof of intentional discrimination, not discriminatory effect, but intent. Justice Kagan's dissent was unsparing, and in a rare move, she read it aloud from the bench. It's a gesture reserved for moments when a justice believes something of historic consequence has just occurred. In it, she said, quote, "The Voting Rights Act is, or now more accurately was, one of the most consequential, efficacious, and amply justified exercises of the federal legislative power in our nation's history. It ushered in awe-inspiring change, bringing this nation closer to fulfilling the ideals of democracy and racial equality, and it has been repeatedly and overwhelmingly reauthorized by the people's representatives in Congress. Only they have the right to say it is no longer needed, not the members of this court. I dissent, then, from this latest chapter in the majority's now completed demolition of the Voting Rights Act." The now completed demolition of the Voting Rights Act.
Let me say this, though, that there is a coalition out there, a fusion coalition that Reverend Dr. Martin King Jr. spoke about on March 25th, 1965. The one that he spoke about after free labor, after slavery, where white men and black men came together in fusion coalitions, that's out there right now. But we can grow it. But the Democratic Party and others must respond to the Southern strategy and do what was done after slavery, after free labor, where white men voted with black men. They voted economics, not concerned about the color of skin. And that's what needs to be done again by teaching everyone that we're all the same. One race, human race, all human. We all need food, clothes, shelter, free health care, natural health care, right? Free education, college education. All of us. Life leads to happiness, all of us. One race, human race, all human. All the phoenix shall rise again, and the coalition of compassionate people will rise again also. God bless you, and God keep you.